It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. John Barrington, Professor of Revolutionary War History at Furman University. So an evening with Dr. Barrington.
Just to make sure I can complete the talk, I'll take one of these if I may. Okay, tonight I'm going to talk about diplomacy in the Revolutionary War. It's obviously a huge topic, and there are many, many angles to that one could spend hours on. So what I'm going to be trying to do is give an overview and raise some broad questions, which I hope you'll find interesting. Now, one of the big questions, obviously, and I think a lot of people remark on this when they talk about the Revolutionary War, is how did these 13 ragtag states defeat one of the world's great powers? It's always one of the questions that comes up. And, you know, to put some statistics behind that very broad statement, Great Britain is a nation of 10 million people. The 13 colony states had 2.5 million, so that's 4 times the population. Britain had the world's biggest navy. The United States had virtually no navy. Britain had a significant army, not one of the biggest in Europe, but a very professional, well-trained, well-equipped army. Britain also was one of the great financial powers of the world. It had tremendous wealth from taxation and trade and a very sophisticated financial system to back up its war machine. And Britain was also the first, and at that point really the only, industrializing power in the world. So it was a pretty significant enemy to take on in this Revolutionary War. The imbalance becomes perhaps even more extraordinary when you think of 2 other aspects. First of all, Americans were far from united in the Revolution. Now, I guess you probably all heard John Adams' famous formula that, you know, 1/3 were patriots, 1/3 were neutral, and 1/3 were loyalists. And that was just sort of a gut guess. He didn't do polling or any of those things that we try to do nowadays. We do know that about 1/5 of Americans were active loyalists. In other words, they fought and supported the war in some active way. And so maybe 1/3 of Americans as well as isn't too far off. And certainly there were many, many Americans who just wanted to keep their heads down and keep out of it one way or another. Whatever it was they thought, they didn't want to get involved. So it's not as though the entire population of those 13 states was involved in this war. It makes the victory even more extraordinary. And then just one other point to underline this imbalance. 20 years after the American Revolution, Great Britain took on the French and Napoleon. And they won a war against, at times, all of Europe, fighting all of Europe at once. Napoleon was obviously a pretty significant general. So Britain could do that. Britain could win against huge opposition 20 years later. Why couldn't they win against these colonists in the 1770s? And there's a lot of reasons for it, and I don't in any way mean to undermine the courage and determination of the patriots who did fight. It's also an important factor. But a huge reason for the U.S. victory was overseas support, foreign support, and the diplomatic efforts of the United States to win allies to help redress the imbalance. Now, the most important and best known ally of the Americans, of course, was France. Right, good. And France is a good country to have on your side. The French population was 26 million, so it was 2.5 times Great Britain's. The French had the biggest and, by many accounts, the best trained army in Europe. They're militarily a very important power. They had a decent navy, not as big as Britain's, but the second biggest navy in Europe. What they didn't have was good finances. And as we know, the American Revolution bankrupted them and led to the French Revolution, so that was one weak spot. But in terms of armed forces, they had a lot to contribute. Now, the French and the British have been enemies for centuries. And often it's just assumed that, of course, the French wanted to humiliate the British. And if the British were in a troublesome situation, the French would want to come in and make the most of that. there's some truth to that. But you have to realize that Britain wasn't France's only concern in Europe. France also had very significant interests in Eastern Europe. In some ways, more significant concerns there than anywhere else. The French liked to think of themselves as Europe's dominant power. And they were bothered by the fact that there was a new power in the East rising, one that we're very familiar with from the news today, and that was Russia. And the French were trying to counteract Russian expansion, Russian influence in Eastern Europe. If there had been a diplomatic crisis in Eastern Europe at the time of the American Revolution, the French, for all of their traditional hatred of the British, would not have got involved. So one important and often overlooked precondition to the Franco-US alliance was a very important settlement in Eastern Europe. And the first thing I put on the handout that I gave to some people was the 1774 Treaty of Kuchuk-Kainarchi, which was a treaty between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, i.e. Turkey. But the importance of that treaty was it settled a lot of outstanding issues in Eastern Europe, kept that area pacified and stable for the next decade, and only because of that situation was France free to get involved in the American Revolution. So it's worth thinking about the fact that what was going on within the United States, very important of course, but there were things going on across the world that also impacted US independence. It's easy to get focused on the battles here within the US, but lots of things happening in distant places overseas that were crucial as well. Okay, so France had its hands free, kept looking over its shoulder at Eastern Europe, but did have its hands free to deal with the British and get involved in the American Revolution. They didn't want to rush into anything. Even when fighting broke out, they were tentative. They wanted to make sure that these Americans really were going to stand up, going to be serious about fighting the British. For the first year or more of the war, the Americans were not fighting for independence. They were fighting as the United Colonies and fighting for an improved position within the British Empire. So even after July the 4th, 1776, and the Declaration of Independence was very much aimed at the French. It's one of the most important audiences of the Declaration. The French were thinking, is this serious? Are these people going to go scuttling back to their mother country? They share so much in religion and culture and all the rest of it. We don't want to enter the war, have the Americans make peace with Britain, and find ourselves fighting the British yet again. So France waited. They did give secret aid. And one of the ways they did that was to set up a corporation called Rodrigue, Hortalis and Company. And in theory, this was a private corporation that was trading with America. So if anybody got caught, they could say, hey, this is just a private matter. It's got nothing to do with the French government or anybody else. But in fact, both the French and Spanish governments were supplying a lot of the material goods and money that was behind Rodrigue, Hortalis and Company. So we're familiar with this business of giving aid to foreign countries secretly under all kinds of guises, and that was happening back then. One interesting aspect of Rodrigue, Hortalis and Company and this whole secret aid was that it was set up by Pierre Beaumarchais. I don't know if anyone knows who Beaumarchais was. Heard of him by any chance? Maybe it's a little past his day of fame, but he at the time was one of the great celebrities of France as a playwright. He'd written a very popular play called The Marriage of Figaro. Of course, we know it more through Mozart's opera than through the play itself. But he was a very important fellow, and The Marriage of Figaro is about the common people making fun of the aristocracy. Beaumarchais had ideological sympathy with the Americans. So that's why he took that particular job on, funneling aid secretly. But America needed more than just this secret aid that was coming over sporadically. And Congress created a committee of secret correspondence, which is essentially the first diplomatic arm of the United States, to write to the French, to lobby the French for more significant, more open aid. The first envoy was Silas Deane, businessman from Connecticut who went over and purchased war material and also recruited experienced soldiers. One of the people he recruited was the Marquis de Lafayette. He recruited a number of important people in France. But of course, the really important fellow who went over as the envoy from the United States was Benjamin Franklin. He was sent over at the end of 1776 to try to persuade the French to come out in the open, to give open aid, to conclude an alliance of some kind. Now, why was Franklin a good, he was pretty, getting on in life. He was not, the ocean voyage is pretty arduous. Why send Franklin, of all people, to France? What was it that would make him, he wasn't an experienced diplomat. America didn't have experience diplomatically. What's he famous for?
He had the ability to compromise, and he could charm a room of thoughtful people.
That's absolutely true. Once he got his foot inside the palace, he was excellent at getting on with everybody.
Because it was about court, figuring out who to talk to in the room.
And he had no qualms about playing the court game. Later on, when John Adams was over there, he was very huffy about the whole thing and didn't want to have anything to do with all this formality. But Franklin was very good. Franklin also played up his simple American role. He used to wear a coonskin cap and pretend to be kind of a frontiersman, and then they loved that at their side. I don't know if you know, Marie Antoinette had this little farm built for herself. She looked out and played being a milkmaid and so on and so forth. So even though you wouldn't think it, these great aristocrats loved the simple man, and Franklin played that up. But he had to get inside the court first before he could play this game. And the reason why Franklin was such a valuable person to send over was because he was the most famous American of the time because of his work on electricity. And I'll just say a little bit about electricity so you can appreciate what it was that made Franklin such a celebrity and such a person who had an entree to the French court. Western Europe had recently been through what we call the scientific revolution, where a whole lot of medieval ideas had been overturned. And one of the endpoints of that scientific revolution was Isaac Newton and his discovery of the laws of gravity. And one of the great things about the laws of gravity was it explained a lot of disparate phenomena. The same formula that explained why an apple fell from a tree, why the moon went around the earth the way it did, why the tides moved up and down. And it was just a moment of revelation that the human mind could come up with an insight that explains so much. So Newton was the great hero, and people were looking kind of for the next Newton, as one always does. And one of the big mysteries of the 18th century was electricity. Now, people knew electricity in the form that we would think of as static electricity. And what people had begun to do, people with a scientific interest, either serious or amateur, was to create electric generators in their homes. An electric generator was a big glass jar with something like a broom trained up against it. And if you spin the jar, the friction of the broom on the glass creates a charge, and then there'd be a little wire to tap off that charge. And if you held onto the wire, your hair would stand up. And you feel this exciting, tingling feeling. So people were thrilled by this. I mean, it seems like magic, right? And they loved to play with electricity, and they built bigger and bigger generators. And one of the fun things to do after a dinner party was to have your guests come and see your big generator and hold the end, and they get a shock and everyone would laugh. By the end of the century, these generators so big, it wouldn't have been polite to ask your guests to hold the end of the charge, so they had servants do it. How many servants could you up through your generator passage? So what I'm trying to say with this is that people were familiar with this magical force of electricity. And what Franklin had done that made him so famous was he had proved that lightning and this tamer force that people were playing with were one and the same thing. And that was an eerie moment when suddenly again the universe seemed to be coming under unification. An explanation for many disparate phenomena was beginning to emerge. And so Franklin, he wasn't quite the next Newton. He was up there in terms of scientific celebrity. So he could go to France. He was probably the only American who could go to France and walk into Versailles and talk to the king and talk to the queen and get taken seriously. So that's why he was sent. And having got himself into the court, he behaved in the perfect way to get on with people. So he was very important in persuading the French and putting all kinds of subtle and tactful pressure on. But the French still wanted that sign that the Americans were serious, that they were going to at least play some role in the revolution, and that sign came, of course, with the Battle of Saratoga. The first significant victory for the Americans in October of 1777. And the French said, okay, this war is going somewhere, we will commit ourselves. And early in 1778, they signed the Treaty of Alliance and also a treaty of amity and commerce, setting up trade and so forth between the two countries. Now, the French alliance had many important aspects to it, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but it came with a couple of bonuses. One bonus was that France had allies in India. India was a very important theater for trade and for Franco-British competition. And for Britain, it was becoming really the most important part of the empire. So one of the side effects of the Franco-American alliance was that a number of Indian leaders began to fight against the British. And the most important of these was Hyder Ali, who was the Sultan of Mysore, a state in the south of India. And he went to war against Britain in 1979, launched a massive army into one of Britain's most important provinces, the Carnatic, and laid siege to Madras, one of the centers of British power. The armies involved in the Indian War were huge, tens of thousands. They dwarfed the armies that we think about in the Revolutionary War in the United States. So this is a very important theater of war. And although most of it was fought by the East India Company, the British government was obviously very interested, and the British Navy was necessarily involved in channeling troops and supplies and protecting trade. And that was a big distraction for Britain's Navy. So Mysore is out there again. We don't think of that as an indirect ally of America, or Indian affairs being in any way attached to the Revolutionary War, but it was involved. The other bonus that came out of the conflict, out of the French-American alliance, was that Spain also joined the war against Great Britain. Okay, Spain and France were ruled by the same royal family, the Bourbons. They had a family compact. They often fought on the same side during 18th century wars. Spain had many reasons why it wanted to go to war against Great Britain. Perhaps the most important reason was the recovery of Gibraltar, the little peninsula in the south of Spain that Britain still owns and is becoming a hotspot for trouble again. And that was one of Spain's main war goals, to get Gibraltar back. They were also interested in war that they lost in the 7 Years' War. Now, just as France had to settle, make sure that Eastern Europe was settled before it got involved, Spain also had to make sure that its neighbor, Portugal, wasn't going to stab it in the back while it was at war with Great Britain. And Portugal and Britain had a long-standing alliance, a very close relationship. So in preparation for going to war against Great Britain, Spain bought the Portuguese off. In 1778, they signed a treaty which redrew the boundary between Portuguese Brazil and Spanish South America. And it redrew it in a way that was very, very generous to the Portuguese. Many of you remember learning about Columbus and how after he came back, the Pope divided the world in two, the Treaty of Tordesillas, and drew a line straight down. The line that the Pope had drawn back in 1494 cut off the nose of Brazil, the tip of Brazil. That's all it was given to Portugal. But think of Brazil today as this huge country, including the Amazon basin. And it was in 1778 that Portugal got all the rest of that territory. And that's why Brazil is such a massive power today. And Portugal was happy with that. It wasn't going to risk losing that by supporting Britain. And so Spain had made its way free to join the American Revolution. So all kinds of things are going on across the world that make it possible for the French and indirectly the Spanish to become involved with the United States. Am I putting too much in here? Does it make sense? Any questions so far?
The quick one. So pre-Saratoga, would you say that the French were kind of looking at the Americans the same way with some of the Irish or Scot rebellions? There would be somebody running from Ireland and saying, France, join us, fight off the British. Or a Scottish rebel saying, France, join us, fight off the British. And it would be, you know, noise, but no real substance. And it feels like they're saying that in 1775, and they're still worried that it's just some Americans, or some British rebels fighting for their rights as British citizens, or British subjects. They're fighting for their rights as British, as Englishmen.
Right.
And they're not really serious about their rebellion.
That's a great point. You know, France has supported the Young Pretender and the Old Pretender, 1715, 1745, and it got burned both times. And so, you know, they're going to be cautious about supporting these rebel groups within the British Empire. The British are always talking about liberty. They're not talking about liberty. But these British Americans might mean it or might not.
And it seems like finally the building blocks of Declaration of Independence, the serious statesman Franklin, the victory at Saratoga, it's like the French are finally able to say, okay, there's enough here. You know, we're not going to get burned like we did in these other situations.
Right, so we'll risk getting involved. And it was a risk in that because they didn't have much money and things could explode elsewhere that would have left them in an awkward situation. But yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up about the Scottish and other rebellions.
The fighting in India, okay, was that British troops, or was that conscripts, Indian conscripts? Or?
It was British officers and then Indian troops. The British, it wasn't quite the formal Indian army of the later Raj, but it was the beginnings of it. That the British would recruit one side and equip one side against Hyder Ali or other groups, and the French were equipping them.
But in effect, those cadres were probably just the numbers. I mean, a little sprinkling of British in India, those few British soldiers would have been proportionally much more potent had they been in America.
Well, it would certainly have helped the British in America, but it's the Navy aspect that is perhaps most important. That Britain really had to keep sea connections open all the way to India, and had to keep a careful eye on the French to make sure they weren't suddenly going to send an army to India. And as I say, I'll talk in a minute, that was a crucial element behind the Battle of Yorktown, is that that's what the British thought the French were doing, was they were heading to India, and they got it wrong at that point.
What year did the Spanish come over here to fight in the colonies?
Well, it's important to, 79 is when they signed an alliance with France, but they never signed a direct alliance with the United States, nor did they recognize the U.S. as independent.
But they did fight here, though.
But they gave a lot of aid, and they fought in Florida. They didn't bring troops into U.S. soil.
But I think there was Savannah, too.
Well, the French were there at Savannah, and there may have been occasional, Spanish officers and Spanish ships assisting the French, but formally, Spain did not recognize the United States because Spain had more colonies than anybody else in America and didn't want to encourage the notion that colonists all to rebel. They didn't want to set a precedent. So it's an indirect alliance, but it's very, very important. And I'll talk about Yorktown to just sort of underline how important the French and the Spanish were. One of the things that Washington had said from the beginning of the Revolution is we're never going to really drive the British out while the British have naval superiority off the Atlantic coast. Because they can always supply their army wherever it is, and they can ship that army to a new place. And we just don't have that kind of flexibility. So he was anxious to get a foreign power, it would have to be a foreign power, to achieve naval superiority. Now with France and Spain in the war, those two navies together were bigger than the British Navy. And so Britain was really thinly stretched. And they had all kinds of spies in French ports, and in the French court, of course, and trying to work out how are the French going to dispose of their ships, how are the Spaniards going to dispose of their ships, so the British could use their navy to the best effect. And what happened before Yorktown was that the British saw a French fleet leaving the important Brest, heading out somewhere they thought it was going to India. And so they sent a fleet to India. In fact, the fleet went to the West Indies. And that was the one point in the war when Britain lost naval superiority in the Atlantic off the United States. And that's what made Yorktown possible, because the French fleet blockaded Chesapeake Bay, prevented British ships coming and removing Cornwallis or bringing in reinforcements. And that French Navy was essential to that particular victory. And it was only at that point of the war, because of the distractions that the British were facing elsewhere, that the French were able to achieve that naval superiority. So that's one very important way in which the French helped America at Yorktown. Obviously also the French had soldiers there. And the French had sent soldiers over to help Washington besiege New York City, but the French army was a very important component of the US-French army that was doing the land side of besieging Yorktown. Spain wasn't there, but most of the money that was being used to pay French troops and to pay for a lot of the equipment that the Americans were using was Spanish money. Spain was very, very wealthy. Spain's silver mines in Mexico and Peru were among the world's biggest sources of revenue. So Spain just had tons of cash to shell out, and they were giving it to the French and giving it indirectly to the Americans. So that was really where Spanish aid came in. Another thing Spain did, and this really pertains more to the local war in South Carolina. I noticed in the museum there are a lot of artifacts about the South Carolina War, and that's natural enough, and you know, a lot of battlefields and a lot of interest here. For all that, it was very important that Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion and all the rest of them fought in the way they did to dislodge the British from the South Carolina backcountry. One important factor that we mustn't forget is that when Spain joined the war, one of the things Spain did was to invade Florida from Louisiana. And through 1780 and 1781, the Spaniards were campaigning along the Gulf Coast. Florida in those days stretched all the way to Louisiana. And they had taken Mobile, and then there was a long siege of Pensacola in 1781. And that campaign in Florida drew off a lot of British soldiers. It also drew off large numbers of Loyalist soldiers that Britain was counting on to hold the southern states. And without that Spanish campaign in Florida, it would have been a very different balance of resources in Georgia and South Carolina. We tend to drop Spain out of the narrative. We like to think that it was all done by the native heroes. But Spain was an important player in that campaign. Okay, there are other things one can bring up to suggest how important French and Spanish aid were. But I'll leave their side of the story there. If it's true that the United States would not have won its independence without aid from France and Spain, is that a problem? Is it a problem? Maybe it's a problem for national pride. But it might be a problem on a more ideological level. France and Spain were both absolute monarchies. They were not enamored of liberty, of representative government, of civil liberties, any of those things that the United States was supposedly all about. So is it uncomfortable to think that the United States won its independence with aid from authoritarian powers? Powers whose ideological descendants are the Marxist powers, the totalitarian powers of the 20th and 21st centuries.
Take that where you get it.
What's that? Take it where you get it? Well, that's, yeah. You just have to do what you can.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, I guess. In the case of the long-standing rivalries of the French and the Spanish for the last 100 years, that yes, you're right. That if, whether it's Franklin, Adams, or Washington himself, I mean, when Washington is writing and he heard the bullets whistle and what a glorious sound, he was fighting against Native Americans and Frenchmen.
Right. Yeah.
But when the opponent becomes an oppressive regime of George III, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So
And on a practical basis, it makes perfect sense. But, you know, standing back and reflecting on the progress of liberty through history, you know, I don't want to get too political here, but, you know, there's, I guess, a general wish that the world would move more in the direction of democracy. And we hoped during the Arab Spring that was going to happen, and it didn't seem to pan out that way. So, you know, the United States has definitely been a very, very important force for freedom across the globe. Was it a fluke? Was it a strange accident that this force for freedom came about? And was it the result of authoritarian miscalculation?
Well, the dilemma you're speaking of, I mean, most of us have read about like, the feud between Adams and Jefferson, or between the Federalists and the early Democratic Party of Jefferson. And that one of the fundamental arguments was, how cozy are we with the British after the treaty, and how cozy are we with the French? The French helped us in the war, but now they're a stinking monarchy, and they're, you know, which is why Jefferson and others were so happy when the French Revolution started. You know, liberté. So, you know, even the earliest generation of Americans, of Hamiltonian Federalists and Madison and Jeffersonians, I mean, that conflict of how we interact with those British powers, and about the one political party in America saying the French stink, and the other power is saying, no, the French have changed. The French are now for, you know, liberty and freedom. And that was a clash that we were dealing with from the time of Presidents 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right, it was absolutely an issue at the time. You know, people were bothered by the French alliance in Congress, saying, you know, are we making a deal with Satan here? And certainly afterwards,
and of course also the religious component that sometimes we downplay now, but France was Catholic.
Yeah, and Protestantism was associated with liberty, Catholicism with oppression for all kinds of historic reasons. Well, let me bring in a couple of other foreign helps in the United States, which at least redresses the balance. It wasn't just authoritarian powers that helped the United States. So if one is bothered by that, maybe it's just a practical issue, but if one is bothered by the authoritarian support for the United States independence, so were other countries too. The Dutch. Britain and the Netherlands went to war at the end of 1780. And the Dutch weren't a great power. They had been a century earlier, but they were significant. And they had a reasonable navy, and again distracted Britain from India and elsewhere. But one of the things they directly did to the United States was they pumped money into the United States in those last years of the war, when the United States was on its knees. Congress could not raise taxes. The states were not being cooperative. The economy was in a terrible state. Nobody had much money to give anyway. As you know, the continental currency was just paper. It was worth nothing. America had nothing to pay its soldiers with, to pay for supplies with. It was really dependent on handouts. But the Dutch were ready, and John Adams in the negotiations here, were ready to give some significant loans to the United States that helped to keep the U.S. government afloat. Otherwise, even after Yorktown, there could have been a terrible collapse. So that's one thing the Dutch did, very, very important. And the Dutch were a republic. They had a monarchical figure, but he was elected. He wasn't he wasn't a dictator by any means. The Dutch were ruled by elected representatives. They had a constitution. So that's one constitutional power that helped out. The other important freedom-loving people, without whom, I'm going to argue, the American Revolution would not have been successful, were the British. This is a huge paradox. As you mentioned, we always think George III is this terrible tyrant. In fact, he was a constitutional monarch. He had to do what Parliament, what he could get through Parliament. I mean, Parliament was really the body in charge. Britain had a constitution, it had a Bill of Rights, it had trial by jury, it had all those conceptions of civil liberty that became part of the American concept of liberty. And that was important because throughout the 1760s, during the taxation debates, America had always had its supporters in Britain. I mean, to very much simplify things, there were kind of two parties in Britain. There were the Tories, who were more royalist and authoritarian, and the Whigs, who believed that Parliament should have more power and tended to be sympathetic to the Americans. And so when the Stamp Act was repealed, that's because the Whigs got into power. When other taxation laws were drawn back, that's because the Whigs were involved. So the story of what happened before the Revolution wasn't just Britain oppressing the colonies, it was a tussle within Great Britain between two parties with two different views about how to treat America. Sadly, in the 1770s, Lord North and the Tories were in charge. And that's why the final crisis ended up in war. There was always that opposition party waiting in the wings to take over, being vocal and critical of Lord North, of George III throughout the war. And there was a free press in Britain, so they could do that. One of the impacts of that criticism, of that opposition, was that George III and Lord North had to frame the war in America as a war of liberation. The argument they made to the British voter was, look, these patriots are an unrepresented minority who have seized power through force. The mass of the country are loyalists. We're just trying to free them and let them stand on their own 2 feet. And we know that the British vastly overestimated the number of loyalists. But that was the argument they were making to win British public opinion. And as the war went on, it became clearer and clearer that there weren't as many loyalists. That this war was not the easy, straightforward thing that Lord North was trying to present it as. The opposition became more empowered. And one of the most important impacts of Yorktown was, of course, a military victory. And a lot of British troops surrendered. But it was a political victory for the Whigs in Britain. What it affected was a change in government. Early in 1782, because of Yorktown, Lord North could no longer make an argument that this war was winnable, that it was a war of liberation. The Americans were just desperately anxious to have Britain back, and what Britain was doing was facilitating that. The Southern campaign had now collapsed. And so the North government fell, a pro-American government took over. And it was a pro-American government with whom Franklin, Adams, and John Jay were negotiating the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The United States got a very good deal from that Treaty of Paris, in part because Franklin and Lord Shelburne, who was the main power in Britain in 1782, were close buddies. And so it's a very odd situation where the political allies of the Americans, all the way through the 1760s, the people that Americans relied upon to get rid of the stab back and the rest of it, were now in charge and were willing to give the U.S. their independence. There wasn't that division in Britain over Napoleon 20 years later. Most Britons were quite ready to throw themselves behind the war against France, and that's why the British triumphed. The divisions in Britain and the more reformist Whig Party in Britain was vital to the way the whole U.S. Revolution panned out. Just to give you a sense of the scale of support amongst British voters, in 1768-69, there was a petitioning movement for various reforms in Parliament, and among the reforms were called to end taxation of America. 1/4 of British voters signed those petitions. That was in 68-69. In 1780, there were tremendous riots in London, headed by a fellow called Lord George Gordon, who, for various reasons, was pro-American. He had other items on his agenda, too. But for several days, London was in the hands of the mob. And it was very clear that there was a powerful upwelling of support for the Americans within Great Britain. So the British war effort was being undermined from within constantly. So it may be that although France and Spain were very, very important aids to America, it may be that the American Revolution fits a pattern of a general, long-term progress of representative government through time. That makes me feel more comfortable that there is, nothing in history is inevitable exactly, but I'd like to think there's a big trend. That the American Revolution was not an anomaly in that trend. That part of the American victory was its link to constitutional forces within Great Britain. So that's the argument I'll conclude with, and I don't know if you buy it or not. there's just a sort of broad overview of some of the diplomatic aspects of the revolution. And I think it's a fascinating topic also to read about, lots of stories about spies and so forth. So it's always, one of Franklin's great buddies from Britain, Edward Bancroft, was the private secretary of the American delegation throughout the war. He was spying for Great Britain. Bancroft and Franklin knew each other because of electricity. Bancroft had discovered that electric eels emitted the same electric force that everyone was playing with. So he was part of that electric community. Anyway. Okay, cool. Yes?
How much of an impact did the delay in communication and ideas have? I mean, I keep thinking it would be a totally different history of the world if we had something like the internet back then. You know, where everything's immediate all the time. But it seems that if you made a treaty here and you agreed to do something, and it took you how much longer to get over the land and talk to somebody about it and get back over here. So there's a delay in communication everywhere.
Yeah, these torturous negotiations, you know, with maybe 1 month, 2 month journey across the Atlantic. And having to, one of the aspects where this really comes in is that Congress, when they sent Silas Deane and Benjamin Franklin over, pretty much had to trust them to use their judgment. I mean, they had instructions, and there were certain things they were supposed to do and supposed to not do. But they couldn't keep phoning back home to say, here, this awkward situation has arisen, or, you know, here's this Prussian officer that seems to be, you know, a really competent fellow. Do you need him? You know, just ship them all over and just hope they can find a job. That's a very good point. That it really was a different ballgame altogether. Yeah. So it's a good thing that Franklin was trustworthy. See, Silas Deane was not so trustworthy, or at least maybe that's unfair. He didn't understand his instructions the way that Congress understood them, and there was a real lack of communication between the two. And so he got in trouble for lining his own pockets with Congress's money. He saw it as a commission. And back in those days, people were much more lax about the idea of taking a little cut when you're doing the government. But this sort of got out of control and escalated in ways that maybe it wouldn't have done if there had been better communication. Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic point as well. I mean, the classic example isn't from the next peace treaty between America and Britain, but the treaty's already been signed in Europe, but Andrew Jackson, the British and American forces around New Orleans don't know the treaty's been signed.
Right.
So there's perhaps the most strategically important battle of the Second American War of Independence from Britain is fought after the treaty is signed. And indeed, I think it's a fantastic point that it was without the communication. I mean, ambassadors now are just kind of, an ambassador is the same thing. When you can pick up the phone, call Washington before you step into the meeting. It was a totally different. When you were a minister, plenipotentiary,
yeah.
Thank you. You know, an ambassador extraordinary. You really were the voice of America in that country because, you know,
they had to trust you.
And you had to say things on behalf of the American government that the American government then had to stand behind.
Right. Otherwise, very embarrassing. Now, the war maybe tells a good case too, because the war started because of a mistimed communication. One of the causes of the war was the British Orders in Council, which was blocking American trade with Europe. The British repealed that just before the declaration of war happened. Yeah. Some people argue that if we'd had more communications, maybe the war of 1812 wouldn't have happened.
Now, the average person that lived out here in the wilderness, that lived out here trying to have a living, they probably didn't know much about all this, or probably didn't even much care, did they?
Well, that's true of a lot of people. People had very local horizons. And one of the reasons why Congress found it so difficult to raise support in the war is that, you know, the militia would turn out in droves when the enemy was on their front doorstep. As soon as the enemy left, they all went home. And the Continental Army didn't grow and grow throughout the Revolution. It remained relatively small compared to the total U.S. population. People didn't have that national sense of what the cause was about. And so one of the things that might have happened, you know, you can guess all kinds of things, but say if those Dutch loans had come in at the last minute to keep Congress afloat. If Congress had to just give up. The United States, let's say, still won its independence, but it might have been very much as 13 individual countries without any federal government that could take credit for Yorktown. Some of the things Yorktown did, it gave the federal government some kind of credit, which it didn't really have to that point too much. And if the federal government had disappeared because they had no money, who knows what would have happened. What's that?
So you want me federal?
Well,
Some might argue we would have been better off under the remain under the Articles of Confederation, but
possibly. Who knows? It's fun to do counterfactual history and speculate on what might have been.
but there was no Bill of Rights under the Articles of Confederation. So.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions?
So you do see then a trend, as you're connecting the dots from the American Revolution as part of a trend of upward liberty. Would you put Cromwell and the rise of, the Long Parliament, would you put that as part of a throwing off of, dare I say, absolute monarch to the Georgia first and second were not the same absolute monarch as the pre-Cromwell. So you're putting America's Revolution in that arc, as opposed to so many of us think about it as the spark of liberty that then happens in France and South America.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I'm really giving a classic Whig interpretation of history, so that it starts with the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell, who may have taken things too far, but certainly that Civil War is the first important Civil War. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 is then the next step in that, which formalizes and stabilizes.
Or so many Englishman rights.
Right, and the American Revolution, and so on and so forth. And the French Revolution did and didn't. I mean, it both introduced the idea of liberty and then made a bit of a mess of it. And so, yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Gates.
Yeah. So, and I should remind everybody too that two nations really came out of the American Revolution, or in some ways three. The second being English-speaking Canada, because all the loyalists who couldn't stand or weren't allowed to stay here went up north and established first of all colonies that had very similar institutions, representative government, civil liberties, all the rest of it. And so, that neighbor of ours to the north we always forget about was reborn out of this conflict. One other country that came out of the American Revolution was the African country Sierra Leone, which was founded from slaves who were liberated as part of a promise made by British forces that if you fight with us or support us, you get your freedom. And then after the revolution, a lot of them went to Sierra Leone in Africa. And one point of that country was to create an African nation that was not involved in slavery or the slave trade, to prove that Africa could be a source of commerce and wealth without having to resort to slavery. So although it's been in a mess recently, it was a very important, shining example of a whole new road forward for Africa. So there's a lot of spin-offs that are part of the story of liberty.
As far as France and England were concerned, was this a carryover of the 7 Years' War?
Well, absolutely. That was the most recent grievance between them. I mean, the French had lost so badly in that war that they did want revenge and wanted to recover some of their territories, maybe in America, certainly in India. And so that was the immediate spark. But it went back even further than that, because the French had supported rebels in Scotland throughout the 18th century. The French and the British, in the Middle Ages they clashed, of course, but more recently, throughout the 18th century, they clashed. And it was a big ideological and religious conflict. The British said, we are Protestant, we are free. The French are Catholic, and they are home to tyranny, and so forth. And the French said the British are barbarians, and they have terrible food. We are the place of culture and the arts. That's kind of the rivalry that was there. It was very deep.
They got the food right.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for turning out on